Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Everett, and along with my wife, Michelle Everett, we're the host of God's Kingdom, where we discover in the Word of God that we are a chosen generation, a holy nation, a kingdom of priests, and a special treasure unto our God. Recently, we ministered in Forest City, North Carolina, at Epicenter Church with Pastors Joe and Lynette Dutton. And we were asked to minister on kingdom eschatology. Now you may ask, what is that big word eschatology? Well, we're talking about end time things and also the future rule and reign of our Lord Jesus Christ. So I'm inviting you right now, tune in and let's study kingdom eschatology together. Being that I'm a man that is under authority, and I understand authority by being under authority. And when Pastor Joe asked me to deal with the subject of kingdom eschatology, and I know for a lot of people that means a lot of different things. When you have a background as diverse as mine, I started out in the Baptist church in North Carolina, of course. You're not a North Carolinian if you haven't at least been a Baptist one time in your life. That was where, of course, my parents, that was their church, and that's where I cut my teeth as far as relating to church. Now, at the age of 17, Christ came and he apprehended me. And from there, I shifted a bit. And that's when I became acquainted with classical Pentecost. All right? And prior to that, they had told us, make sure that you stay away from those Pentecostal people. They said they're crazy. They roll on the floor. They hoop, they holler, they hang from chandeliers. So stay away from those folk. And little did I know that in the plan of God, I was to become one of those folk. And so at 17, and in some ways it was by default because I really just wanted to get my older sister off my back. She came every Sunday afternoon at the service. And she said, you need to get saved. You need to get saved. I said, I'll get saved later. I have some things that I want to do right now. And if you just fill in the blank, when you grow up in poverty, you have one thing you want to do: get out of poverty. That was my intent. And I said, and then after that, I don't mind getting saved. She said, no, so Jesus, subject to come back at any minute, and you don't want to be left here because the only way that you're going to get to eat is that you got to receive the mark because you can't buy or sell if you don't. And of course, she had my attention then because as a 17-year-old, I enjoyed eating. And I didn't think that I needed a mark in order to eat. So I said, okay, I agree. I will come one night to that tent revival, which, by the way, was on my grandmother's property. And I said, and after that, you'll leave me alone, correct? She said, yes, I'll leave you alone. Now, God will let you believe whatever you need to believe in order to get you moving. That was my case, and he did exactly that. And when I got out there, things started happening in my heart that I didn't expect to happen. Now, it bypassed my head. You see, many times when the Lord is ready to shift you, he'll bypass your head and he'll begin to deal with your heart. And before your head can begin to think about it, what is happening, your heart has already been captured. That was my case that night when the message was coming forth. And Apostle Sanders, who became my father in the Lord for many years, he said, I wasn't going to make an altar call tonight, but just in case someone wants to give their life to the Lord, we're going to provide that opportunity. And once again, before my head could think about it, my feet were already walking up there. And once I got up there, my heart was so pierced by the message. I said, Lord, I said, if you can do anything with me, okay, here I am. And it was at that moment that he began to speak to me about what has been my lifelong purpose. He said, the days will come when I will send you to the nations of the earth to declare the gospel of the kingdom. I had no idea what he was talking about. But that was my first acquaintance with this idea of kingdom that was not connected to Jehovah's Witness. That was my first time. Because again, they told us, stay away from those folk who come every Saturday morning knocking on your door. You really don't want to talk to them, stay away from them. And they talked about things like the kingdom. Would you like to see the world become a better place? Well, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? And they said, well, we have something here, some literature for you to read. They said, well, stay away from those people. But here it is, the voice of the Lord saying that I'm going to send you to the nations of the earth to declare the gospel of the kingdom. So my question is, what is that? All right. So the next instruction was for the next year, you're to study Hebrews chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. Now, again, I had been in church all 17 years. Sunday school, vacation Bible school, BTU, all of them. I had no idea what Hebrews chapter 6, 1 and 2 was. But as I read, I realized these are foundation stones by which you're going to erect and build a house on. And if you do not lay these solidly, then God doesn't issue forth a building permit for you to go on. Having been in construction somewhat, I understand what a red flag is. It's when you haven't built it according to the pattern or the specification. Do you think the tabernacle of Moses would have received the glory cloud if Moses had veered away from the pattern? Absolutely not. It was sanctioned because they built it according to the pattern. And so if you're going to build a life properly, you've got to lay the foundation stones in it and then begin to place the superstructure on those foundations. And so I was compliant to what the Lord asked me to do, and then he began to teach me about the kingdom. Now, secondly, you can't go very far without also being introduced to this vast subject called eschatology. Now, whenever you think of ology of anything, it's the study of, such as, psychology is the study of the psyche or the study of your mind. Are you with me? Physiology, come on, the study of physics. So eschatology is the study of that which is, and I'll define it for you in a moment. But it is important. It is important. It is important to understand. Now, why has it become such a debate through the years? And I think it's because oftentimes we get our eyes off the thing that is important. You see, if you keep the main thing, then you're not going to go to the left or to the right and get sidetracked into debates and discussions. That's not going to be fruitful for anybody. What it will end up doing is basically just dividing brethren. And that's not what I'm here for. I've had my days of that. All right? And I understand that, when you walk with the Lord nearly 5 decades, you run out of arguments. And what you become is a lover. Yeah, you want to see the family flow together. You want to recognize that we all have value and God has given each of us lanes to run in. And we're not competing against each other, but we're helping to complete one another. And what one doesn't have, God has given to the other. That's why when even he talks about what we call the ascension gift ministries in Ephesians chapter 4, you don't see one single case where he says he gave all to one. But he gave everybody some. He made some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, pastors, and teachers. All that simply means is that each person that has been graced to function in any of them, you only got some of him. You didn't get all of him. It took us some time to realize that, because usually back then we thought what our flow was the only flow that was right. Yeah, you're right. We really needed help. And he did help us, because he knew that really our hearts was really to flow with him. And so you learn the value of other brothers and sisters. You learn to appreciate the impartation of God into their lives, and you recognize that your knowledge base is not all knowledge. Okay? So to put it this way, there's not a man, there's not a message, there's not a ministry, there's not a movement that has all of God encased in it. You'll find God in some others. Okay? And that's what I have discovered in this subject, eschatology. Now, let me give, first of all, a quote before I read what I want to read in Acts chapter 3. When Jesus was raised from the dead, and he, of course, convened with the soon-to-be apostles, sent ones, and the scripture tells us that he was with them for 40 days before he ascended. And he was still discussing things pertaining to the kingdom of God. I wish those recordings were there for us. But what we have to do is simply accept what Luke, who is the writer of Acts, what he said. That was what he focused on. Now, that wasn't something new and different, because that is what he talked about the whole time. That's what he preached. He would go from village to village. He wouldn't necessarily just landlock himself in one place, but from village to village, talking about the things pertaining to the kingdom of God and demonstrating the reality that the kingdom of God was present. Now, even when he sent them on a trial run, you'll find this in Matthew chapter 10. Also, you'll find portions of this in Luke chapter 10. But he said to them, now you're to go preach saying. Now, I grew up under a lot of preaching that wasn't saying anything. They were preaching. They were talking real loud. Oh, yes. And if you took basically all of the fillers out of the tape, you probably only had about 10 minutes worth of substance. Maybe 10 minutes worth of substance. Because, you know, if they're constantly saying to you, somebody say glory. Somebody say hallelujah. Somebody say thank you, Jesus. That's what a lot of it was back then. And so, you know, all that is fillers and cliches. Now, it's not that that's been dismissed from modern preaching. It's still there. But you just have to learn to, you know, work your way through it. But he said, you go forth, preach, saying that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That is, it is within your reach. This is what Jesus was saying nearly 2,000 years ago. So that right there just absolutely dismisses the argument of whether the kingdom is now, past, or future. If it's at hand, you know, for instance, if I said, we are right in the vicinity of each other. In fact, we're in close proximity. Would that be the truth? Would you think that I was talking about you were in Charlotte and I'm in Forest City? If something's at hand, it is within your reach. And he said, that's the message that you are to take forth. He said, now in the process, you're to demonstrate this message. He said, you're to heal the sick. You're to cleanse the leper. You're to raise the dead. You're to throw the devil out. He said, freely you have received, freely you give. And what that tells us is that along with the articulation, there's a demonstration as evidence that what you're saying is true. You see, come on, all talky and no walky. You have no evidence of what you're saying. All you're doing is just having a good speech. But he told them, listen, I'm empowering you. I'm giving you of his authority. See, he was delegating to them. There's no real authority without delegation. He said, I'm delegating to you. And therefore you're able to do this. And when they came back with their report back to him for a time of appraisal, what did they tell him? What was the one thing they were excited about? The devils were subject to us in your name. And that is just like a teenager, highly impressed with the raw display of power. Why do you think a teenager's got to try his dad's car out to see how fast it'll go? Because they're always enamored with the raw display of power. And so what Jesus had to do was bring correction or balance to them in that by saying, now that's not really what you should be excited about. That's just a fringe benefit of obedience. He said what you really should be excited about is that your name is written. All right? Yeah, so you're tracking with me here. So there's always demonstration with the speaking of the message. And it's interesting the process that Jesus took, because he really did not talk about anything as far as the termination of his ministry, as far as public ministry here on earth. Now, his ministry is not completed, because Hebrews tells us that he's entered into a more excellent ministry, and that is the ministry of intercession, where he's interceding for us according to, come on, Father's will. We're tracking together. All right. So he really, though, didn't begin to talk about his leaving until about midway their development. And it was after Peter received from the Father the revelation of who he really was. Before that, you see, he asked an innocent question. And again, the Lord is like a very skilled lawyer. He doesn't ask you any question he doesn't already have the answer to. And when Jesus asked him, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? Now, at that point, you don't have to display your hand. All you can do is just say what everybody else is saying. And that's what they said. He said, but let's bring this thing home. Who do you say that I am? And then it was at that Kairos moment, Peter said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Immediately, Jesus affirmed him and said, flesh and blood did not reveal this unto you, but my Father which is in heaven. Now, watch the shift of scenes. He's just given him this great approval. Now, he says, and from that time, he began to discuss with them about how that they're going to take him and they're going to kill him. But after 3 days, he's going to be raised from the dead. There was nothing in their understanding about a Messiah that was going to experience that. They thought Messiah would be their champion. He would be here permanently. He would deliver them from all of their enemies. Man, that would be it. He would set up the kingdom of Israel at that time. But here he is changing, if you will, the conversation. He's changing the narrative and saying, they're going to take me, they're going to kill me, but 3 days later, I'm going to get up. Now, at this point, he still hadn't talked to them about, I'm going to leave you. He hadn't talked to them about that yet because he knew that they only could handle just that little bit, and really they couldn't even handle that little bit because the one who had just received the marvelous revelation from the Father, he turns around and starts to rebuke Jesus and said, Lord, hey, let that thing be far from you, because this is how we understand this. If you smite the shepherd, sheep coming next. If they kill you, they're coming after us. So spare yourself, pity yourself is actually the way that the Greek unfolds this thing. And Jesus turns from him. See, sometimes voices that are trying to infuse you with misinformation, the wrong information. That was Adam's problem. When the serpent was fusing them with misinformation, he didn't turn from him. But Jesus turned from that voice and he said, get thee behind me. Come on, he knew the source of that voice. He said, listen, you don't savor as the things that be of God. It's an old English word that means you don't have the mindset of the things that be of God, but the things that be of men. And what was common for men is spare yourself. Do everything you can to protect yourself from demise. And so he continues to develop them. And finally what happens? Exactly what he said. They took him. They killed him. 3 days later, he rose from the dead. And when the women came back to give them, I don't know why anybody's ever thought women didn't preach. Because when they came back with the report that he was raised from the dead, Luke chapter 24, they think that the women are giving them idle tales until they run down to the tomb to find that he's not there. He never told them to run to the tomb. Come on, that was nothing but an expression of doubt. He said, when I'm raised from the dead, meet me in Galilee. That's what he said. That was the only place he said to meet him. He didn't say, meet me at the tomb. He wasn't there. He wasn't there. Hallelujah. And because he wasn't there, that meant that he was raised from the dead. Now he later, shortly after 40 days, he ascends. And what are they doing when in the process of his ascension, after he's finished with his conversations with them for 40 days? They're standing there and they're gazing up. And I'm sure they're trying to figure out what is all going on. And then the angels said to them, ye men of Galilee. And if you allow me to paraphrase here, just for the sake of time, why are you standing there gazing up? The same way, this same Jesus. See, come on, say it with me, same Jesus. Now, that was not a spirit. That was not a phantom. That was not a ghost. It said this same Jesus. Now, yes, he was different. Mark 16:12. He was in another form. That is a flesh, bone man, but he was still a man. Said this same Jesus, just like you see him leaving, he will also return in like manner. Come on, let's keep the focus where it should be. Who was leaving? A man was leaving. Come on, tell somebody. A man was leaving. So if a man left, who's going to return? the man is going to return. Now the question is, what will precipitate his return? See, that's the question. And a lot of arguments have been, when will his return take place? And so you deal with things like, well, can it be any minute? Is it what they call imminent? Is it prolonged? When is it going to happen? And this is where you get into things like Acts chapter 3, where Peter is preaching this phenomenal word. And he says something about Jesus here that you need to capture if you haven't captured it already. Because in verse 17, he says, and now, brethren, I will not that through ignorance ye did this, as did also your rulers. But those things which God before had showed by the mouth of all his prophets, that Christ should suffer, he hath so fulfilled. So we see that the word, the prophetic writings have been fulfilled. Now, if you go into the Old Testament, Jesus in John chapter 9 said this. He said, you search the scriptures, in them you think that you have eternal life, but they are they which testify of me. Now, if you look at the prophetic scriptures, you're looking at all the scripture that was around at that time. We're not talking about New Testament, what we call New Testament. We're talking about what we call the Old Testament, not just the Old Covenant, because all the Old Testament is not the Old Covenant. When you study Hebrews, it tells us that when it's referring to the Old Covenant, it's talking about the covenant that God cut with them after they were delivered out of Egypt. That covenant that was mediated by Moses. Are you with me here? That's what's called the Old Covenant, because you had the covenant of promise with Abraham that preceded that one, starting with the promise in Genesis chapter 12, then being established as a covenant in Genesis 15, where you actually have the cutting of the covenant because you had covenant victims there that were sacrificed. And then this covenant was ratified by an oath in Genesis chapter 22. So you have promise, covenant, oath. That's the trilogy there. That came before the covenant of law. Now, why is this so important? Because when God begins to deal with Abraham,
I trust that you have enjoyed the broadcast today, and we're going to get into this next week again on Kingdom Eschatology. So remember, the kingdom of God is at hand, and it is within your reach.